Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Way the World Works. Today, I want to do a winter-themed episode and talk about snowballs and how one tiny little rule, or let me rephrase this, that the regulatory state, the laws that we have in this country are kind of like a snowball. And what do I mean by that? I mean that when you build a snowball, it starts with one, little thing of snow. And this is me rolling a snowball. As you can see, I've clearly rolled a lot of snowballs in my life. As I talked about in another episode, I don't even like snow. But, snowballs get bigger the more snow you add onto it. And rules are the same way. Just like a snowball really starts with one tiny snowflake. If you want to get down to it, all these regulations, the regulatory state, it starts with one tiny rule and then things snowball. You'll hear that used in that sense as like a verb. It snowballs. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger until, oh my goodness, now you have a giant snowman. So let's talk about that. So like I said, a rule starts small. It sounds harmless, even helpful. Maybe this isn't so bad. But once it's created, it starts rolling. You get the ball rolling, right? And it grows and it expands. And sometimes it turns into something so big, nobody remembers why it was even started or created to begin with. That happens all the time. So today, I want to talk about this in terms of regulatory creep, which sounds creepy because it is. And it's a fancy term that basically means a rule that grows way beyond its original purpose. And if you want to see real world examples, they're literally everywhere, all around government. So a rule might start as something tiny, right? Over time, more rules pile on to that rule. It's like the Hydra, where it's that mythical creature where if you cut it off, 4 heads grow back. But in this one, you don't even have to cut off the heads, just more keep growing. So over time, more rules pile onto it and people use it to control things it was never meant to control, right? And then suddenly you have a huge, complicated system built on one small idea. And once a system gets that big, it gets all the more harder to actually try to tear down or try to reform, right? That's always what happens. We've seen it all throughout history. We see it happening and unfolding today. It's really easy when we see examples of this to think that the people who started it were bad, right? And there's that they call it othering, where anyone who doesn't agree with us is automatically bad. And I want us to be careful when we do that, because good intentions exist. Now, that does not mean good intentions all the time lead to horrible, harmful results. So even if somebody has really good, the best of intentions, that doesn't mean things are going to end well. But I do think it means we need to be careful to not label people as bad. Now, some probably do know what they're doing. I don't want to put it past politicians, but some do. Some are probably doing it with bad intent to control, but some are doing it with good intent. The people who want to ban guns, I think a lot of them, I think control plays into it, but I think the parents who've had a child lost to a gun, they have a good intention, but they don't realize maybe the history behind it, and they don't realize the really bad consequences that could come from it. They're only seeing their own situation, and so they want to, save the kids. And that's not a bad thing, but they're not looking at it logically, and they don't realize that it doesn't work. It's not going to do what it wants to do. So good intentions, it happens. So a lot of times these small little rules start with the best of reasons or the best of intentions, and some people think that they're helping, but this always ends up resulting in the same thing. One, confusions over how to enforce the law. And what that ends up meaning is enforcement becomes more arbitrary, meaning you never know when it's going to happen, and it becomes broader. So little things now get you in trouble over this small rule that probably didn't have any, it probably didn't intend to do that in the first place. Things are unfair, right? Limits on freedom, the biggest one. With more regulations, we become less free. That is just pure and simple. That's what happens. And then there's all these new problems no one even expected to happen, right? So this is what happens time and time again. These are unintended consequences. Let's talk about a few examples of these. All right. So maybe there's a simple safety rule that now turns into a 50-page handbook. Like what? That didn't need to happen. A permit for one activity, and we know so many things are permitted, now turns into, and everyone needs a permit. I'm going to give an example of this. There is a case right now in Arizona where there was a licensing law that applied to big events, big public events. And if you wanted to hold a public event in a park, which it used to just mean like concerts, that's what it was applied to, concerts, things like that, ticketed events, you had to have a license from the city. Okay, so whatever, whether or not you agree with that, I don't think you should have to have a license for that, but okay, whatever. But now they were using this law in, I think it was, it's somewhere in Arizona, I think it was Phoenix. But so they were using this law to say that if you wanted to feed the homeless, if a charity wanted to feed the homeless, you had to have this very expensive license or what you were doing was illegal. And think about it. So first of all, we want people and not the government to take care of other people in our community. We love that idea of voluntary charity. That's what our country was built on. But now the government is basically saying, no, we do a good enough job. If you want to take care of them, you have to pay for this very expensive license. And the people feeding the homeless are usually people who just get donations from people. They're not rich at all. So this puts a burden on them and makes it harder for them to help people. And then people have to rely on the government who doesn't do a good job. And so there was a guy who was helping. His whole life was dedicated to helping the homeless in his community. But then he kept getting arrested because he didn't have a license. Okay, so this is that unintended consequence. And because the law was never meant to apply to things like that. But they interpret it broadly. They used it to get him in trouble. So this is an ongoing case. So that is one way that we see that it's just horrible, right? Okay, let's talk about rent rules. So there was all these like rent control, these rent rules that went into place earlier on in time. And what that ended up doing is creating a housing crisis because there were all these rent rules that, for example, said that landlords couldn't raise the rent. And now landlords are not incentivized to want to be landlords anymore. And it snowballs into all these bad things. So maybe there's like a school dress code, right? That grows into a long list of banned items that maybe includes no political messages on t-shirts, which then becomes a free speech issue, okay? Maybe a park has quiet hours and then it becomes a bunch of other behavioral rules or business licenses. This is a big one, then becomes a long list of approval processes and that turns into a whole beast itself. So this one snowflake isn't a big deal on its own, right? A license for an event, okay, not great, but pick your battles. Wait, but now it gets bigger and it's bigger. And now it's telling us that we can't help the poor, that we have to have licenses for this. So it gets bigger. And this is this regulatory creep because the reason we call it creep is, so we think of creep as like scary or like creepy, but creep is like you're creeping. This is me trying to creep up on someone. This is me like tiptoeing like a burglar. It's like you're trying to creep up on someone, like don't see it happening, right? It happens very incrementally. So this regulatory creep is creepy the way you use it, but it's because they do it sneakily. It's because it's like one step at a time, and then suddenly you end up with this big regulatory state. So I said the phrase unintended consequences. What does that mean? That are these things that happen because of a rule, but they were never planned, okay? And sometimes, again, I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt, but sometimes they are planned. I think sometimes government is like, oh, we can have more control, but a lot of times it isn't. So just like a snowball, when you pack the snowball, too tightly and you wanted to hold it together, but you didn't expect that now it's going to be so heavy, someone is actually going to get hurt when you throw it at them, even though even little snowballs kind of hurt. I've been in one snowball fight with my cousins in my entire life. And let me tell you, the small ones didn't feel any better than the big ones. Both hurt. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. So rules are just like that. And I mentioned, the Hydra. This mythical creature with multiple heads, or when you cut off one, like 3 more grow in its place. That's exactly what happens here, right? Because let's say this rule was invented to fix one problem. Okay, so you fix that problem, and then what happens? You fix that problem, maybe, we need a licensing law for a big event. You fix that problem allegedly. And then now you have all these other problems, right? So that's what happens. You're making it bigger. You're not fixing a problem. What you're actually doing is creating like 5 more. So this happens all the time. So just to kind of put everything together that we've talked about, good ideas, or I don't want to say good idea. I don't think they're ever good ideas. Good intentions, right, can become bad rules when they grow out of control. Power tends to expand unless people push back. But if we're being creeped up on and we don't see that it's happening, we're less likely to push back because we don't actually notice that it's happening until it's gotten too big, right? Governments almost never shrink their own rules. They won't do it. Rarely has that happened, and even when you get leaders in that say, we're going to shrink it, sometimes they shrink some and then grow others. A lot of times we've talked about this with the budget where Republicans will say, we want to slash the budget, but also here's trillions more dollars to the Pentagon. So it's a matter of where the spending is going, not the lack of spending, things like that. So the longer a rule exists, The more rules get added to it, that is just the way it happens. And then these complex systems, they all started out with that tiny little step, that one little snowflake. And then there's just like, well, just one more rule, just one more rule. And sometimes, and this is real scary, sometimes the additions to the rules are put in as little teeny like side notes in a bill and like a very long hundreds and hundreds of pages worth of, of a law in a bill. And then we don't even know they're in there until it gets passed. Sometimes they don't even give congressmen enough time to read it to know that it's in there. It's a creepy process. See what I did there? Let's put this in another fun winter analogy. So, you don't get a giant snowstorm all at once. It all happens with one snowflake and then another. And the same happens with a rule, right? One rule might not seem like a big deal. Why fight it? But 10, but 100, but 1,000. Now you get to the point where our book of laws, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it. It's like stacked so tall. It's ridiculous. You can Google and find pictures of that. So it's our job to push back, and it's hard to do that when we don't really know that it's happening. And that's where they get you, right? Because we don't see it until it's gotten too big. So I want to leave you with a call to action, empowerment. Now, it's not easy to follow every single instance of regulatory creep. And that's why it is the way it is. But be more active in your local government. Maybe in the federal level, it's too hard and too confusing to keep track of, but keep an eye on it locally. Do the things that you can do and stand up. Go to these city council meetings. Go to local zoning board meetings. Because let me tell you, a lot of regulatory creep goes on there. A lot of like the silliest regulatory creep goes on there. So be involved. The people or the government is not going to rein in itself. It's not going to do it. So you need to do there to put pressure, to be there to do that and to put pressure on them. So it's empowering because it's saying that we do have some control over this. We have to be aware. We have to know when it's happening. So next time you build a snowball, think about it. Remember that, that one little snowflake can turn into a really big snowball that can really hurt your sister or friend. So be careful. Be careful out there in all your snow battles of the winter. I will leave it there. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, I will talk to you later.